tell us a little story, a little strange storyteller. Your father was a lawyer, and it happened something very strange, I think, ever since in the way that you made your movie later. You are, of course, the father of the modern action movies, but you show every time your character thinking, watching around them to find solutions to the problems. And when you were a kid, your father was partially blind. And he asked you to watch his clients as a lawyer, you have to tell him how your clients were reacting. Tell us about this.
Yeah, my father was a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. My great-grandmother, Irish lawyers, all forever. And I was the first one who screwed up. But my dad lost his sight in the South Pacific in World War II. He had about 10% of his peripheral vision this way. So he couldn't look somebody in the face because he couldn't see them. And he used to take me home when I was a little kid, and these weren't like major cases or anything. They were traffic accidents and junk. He was doing very well when they delivered it all, something like that. But so these were, he would interview witnesses, and it was usually in a bar. And he started taking me along when I was like 5, 6. And he'd have me just sit on the stool in between him and the guy who was interviewing. And at first he just asked simple questions about what I thought about the man or whatever. And later, as I got older, he'd start asking specific questions. What did the man do when I asked ... That sort of thing. That. Anyway.
Yeah, perhaps it's possible that this
It's a weird thing because, you know, Alexander Graham Bell wasn't trying to invent a telephone. He was trying to make a hearing aid so he could talk to his deaf mother.
Good story. Good story. But first, you are of course a great director, but your first passion was theater. You play Shakespeare, you play Beckett. Why did you change your mind, passing from theater to movies? Because it's not exactly the same.
I didn't want to be an actor. I wasn't very good at it. Being an actor, you have to put your mind away and just play. It's a gift. And I didn't have it. I didn't want the life of it. And while I was at Juilliard, I saw these guys who were independent filmmakers. And I started hanging around with them, and I realized that filmmaking was an aesthetic pursuit, but it was half engineering. Still is. Filmmaking is half engineering. And it fit with my mind. And, you know, I wanted to do it.
Is it true that you study movies, watching movies shot by shot, long afternoons in movie theaters?
Of course. No, the first thing I did, everybody's got a different idea what a movie is. You know? If you ask 1,000 people what a movie is, you're going to get a whole bunch of different answers. You know, it's a story about blah, 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 or whatever. So, my reasoning was, if I want to learn to make movies, I have to learn what a movie is. Okay? So what I did was I played hooky from Juilliard and got myself in a lot of trouble because you weren't supposed to play hooky. But I went out to, there's a theater up on Broadway, New York, called Failure, and I went to a movie, a particular movie, and I started up in the morning when they started showing the movie, and I watched it all that day until midnight, 1 in the morning, the next day. And then I went the next day to this same movie. was well made by someone who knows how to make a movie. And it was so simple. So the movie I went to see was throughRed. It was La Nuit Americana, Day for Night. And the whole idea was to get past the story and then get past the moments you like. Oh, isn't it cool when actress does something or other? Get past all of it. So finally, you just can look at the bare facts of what are you looking at. And I suppose my answer to this at the time was, a movie is a chain of shots of pictures in a particular order. It's not random access. In a particular order that draws in and involves an audience for a certain amount of time. And there's a language of pictures of, what picture goes with what. And how can you cut from one picture to another picture and make it work, that it's sort of like a key, music. In a particular key, a piece of music is in a particular key, then there are only certain notes you can put in that piece of music. And movies are like that. If it's a particular style of story, a particular style of movie, then the shots should be from that key. Should be shots that go with that style of movie. I'm babbling here.
No, it's fascinating. That is how you learn to make movies, watching movies, studying
no one can teach you how to make movies are self-taught. Everybody who has learned how to make movies has taught themselves.
To come back
and at least 10,000 hours. It's well worth it.
Yes, it's long time. To come back to your story, after journalism school, you became a director, you directed non-professional movies, short movies, and then commercials. And then your first long feature film, you were in Los Angeles. And your first movie is Nomade. Je ne sais pas si beaucoup de gens dans la salle ont vu ce premier film de John McTiernan, Nomade. Il y a quelques doigts qui se lèvent, quelques-uns, voilà quand même. Nomade, it was a fantastic movie with Pierce Brosnan, who was a TV star at the time, who played the role of Jean-Charles Pommier, a French anthropologist who is lost in Los Angeles. Were you presenting the way that you feel about this big town, Los Angeles? You were coming from the east of the United States, now you were in Los Angeles. Were you yourself lost, and the movie is about your own feeling in Los Angeles?
Of course. Yes, it's the material I had to work with. Strange city. Los Angeles is an oasis in the desert where people go to make money. So they can leave. And that's really what it's about. It's sort of, I don't know if anybody knows the Bertolt Brecht opera called Mahagoni, about where this prostitute sets up a town. It's down the coast from the Yukon, and she put it on the coast of Florida, so it's really fantastic geography. But it's down the coast from the Yukon, and it's just devised to take the money away from the miners coming out of the Yukon, right? Well, and it's a city of thieves, okay? Los Angeles is a lot.
So it was a movie about Los Angeles with strange nomads circling around. And it's interesting because there are many things in this movie that will come again in your career. There is your interest for foreign languages, we will talk about this later, and your interest in anthropology, because of course the main character is an anthropologist, but your movie itself is based on the Inuit folklore. Why were you so interested in anthropology?
I wanted to be an anthropologist when I was a kid, so in the middle of college. So I found out there really was no anthropology, there's archaeology, and that's all. Do you know what I mean? There are no undiscovered people and no undiscovered cultures. In fact, we're all part of the same culture now. Even in the middle of, it's funny, when we did medicine, we delivered the land of God. They were all indigenous people, they all were the Indian stock, but we only got people who lived in the city because we didn't want to we didn't want to destroy people who were still living out in an Aboriginal lifestyle. So all of our Indians were actually urban people. Anyway, I was always interested in anthropology. And it's sort of the same thing as, being the kid on the bar stool watching an anthropologist tries to watch people and figure out what they're doing. And tries to be objective, which is nonsense, no one's objective, but tries to step out of what is going on and just look at it and its absolute value. It's like, I don't know, it was Margaret Reed or somebody pointed out that the men were not fighting to get the best wife they could. The men were fighting to attract the eye of the highest ranking female who would choose them. Okay? Now that's a tiny distinction, but a giant difference. And that only happened because I think it was Margaret Reed was outside of the culture, and she could look with distant eyes about what was going on. I don't know. I've always tried to, I call it seeing what you see. We have enormous numbers of social conventions that tell us what we see. For instance, in the 13th century, everybody knew that if it was high in the picture, it was far away. And if it was low in the picture, it was close. And everybody knew that was reality. Until, what was his name, John explained that perspective is a little bit more complicated than that, okay? He broke the social convention because he stepped outside of it and he looked at it. I don't know, all of that sort of stuff seemed like stuff I could use in movies, so I was happy to.
Yeah, it was a good idea because anthropology will come back in Predator and even the 13th Warrior. But to come back to Nomads, there is also one of your first technical signature, the use of flares, of lights parasites. On va voir un petit extrait de Nomads, si vous voulez bien, et vous allez voir l'utilisation de la lumière que fait déjà John McTiernan dans Nomads, et ça donne après dans son cinéma. On regarde un petit extrait. Because it is an effect, natural effect, which was on the scene when you shoot the scene. You don't have to add the light to the scene. Why do you like so much those flares, those light parasites? Because it will come back again and again.
Oh, but it doesn't have to do with regular flares. It has to do with the idea of this wasn't presented to the audience. This was recorded. Okay, so the camera simply photographed what was in front of it because in theory it was real. Okay, well, it wasn't real, but it's an illusion. That's all. That particularly in Die Hard, when we were doing it, it was just about that sense that the movie is not presented, it is observed. Do you know what I mean? Does that translate?
Okay. Pas présenté, il est observé.
Right. It's not a presentation to the audience, it is observed by the audience. Okay? So, part of that is simply having an active narrative, a camera that happens to be in the middle of what's going on here, and it does the best it can to capture what's happening. Okay? And now, that's not real, but it's an illusion. It's a stage trick. And it helps an audience, get an audience, I think, involved.
You're right, it works. No,
but that, because people have asked me about it. Oh, you always like flares. I'm like, no, it isn't about flares. It's about, the movie is perfect. You know, because it's not a presentation. It's an observation. This was observed. It wasn't presented. Okay?
I understand. Vous avez compris Nomad, John, was your first non-fiction movie. It was also the only one that you wrote yourself. It was the first time, the last time in your career. Why didn't you write any more scripts yourself?
I rewrote it.
Yeah, you rewrote, but this one was your story. Why did you continue to write your own stories? Because you stopped.
I didn't have the chance. I didn't have the time. People, kept offering me the chance to do movies that, and I should have slowed down. I should have taken the time. I was writing down ideas and working on scenes and things. And in the last 20 years, I've completed things that I had started even 20 years before. I have 4 films I want to do before. If I get the chance to work again, 4 films I want to do before I'm too old. And I wrote all of them.
Nomad was not a huge success, at the least that you can say, but it was seen by someone called Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Arnold Schwarzenegger chose you to be the director of his next movie, a movie called Predator. Is it really what happened? Arnold Schwarzenegger saw Nomad, and he has chosen you to be the director of his next movie, Predator, or was it Joel Silver?
No, Joel Silver asked me to do the Arnold movie before Predator. I can't remember what it was. It was something. What you must know. What was the Arnold movie before Predator?
Oh, the bodybuilder.
Commando, yes. Commando. Get that man he asked me to do Commando. But I had promised someone else that I'd make another movie, a different movie that I wrote actually. So I didn't do Commando, but Joel came back on his next movie, on the Predator, and I said yes.
And you said yes. Is it true that the idea of the story came from the Rocky franchise? Because someone said, okay, Rocky has beaten everyone, he has won against Russia, now he has to fight alien, and it was the idea of the script?
I have no idea.
I read it's
No idea.
It's a good story. But you trained all your team in Mexico because it was a very difficult shooting in the jungle. Can you explain us how difficult it was shooting there? It was hot. There were spiders, snakes, sickness. How was it?
Actually, when we were actually in the jungle, it was just fine. Shooting in Puerto Vallarta was hard. That was where people would get sick. We had Arnold on an IV. He had such bad diarrhea. He went out to some restaurant, and he had such bad diarrhea. He was sitting off camera, waiting for the shot, and they were putting fluid into him. And we're ready for the shot. Disconnected, and he'd go into the shot. Reconnected. After that, we were in Puerto Vallarta because the designer of the movie that I had nothing to do with had a condo there, and he was getting it rebuilt on the budget of the movie. And there was no jungle there. It was terrible. And John McTiernan and I had campaigned like crazy about, let's go where there's jungle. You want to make a jungle movie? Make it a jungle. So for the first half of the movie, we had to work in Puerto Vallarta. But then the next time we went to Palenque, which had real jungle. And we learned a lot. We took over a hotel. We staffed the kitchen. And, it was just a simple menu, but you could eat anything and you weren't going to get sick. And no one got sick the whole time we were there. We learned how to work in Mexico. And that's where all the jungle was shot.
At the beginning, the alien was supposed to be our national Jean-Claude Van Damme. Why is not the actual Predator? What happened?
Oh, poor Jean-Claude. No, he was a lovely man. And he was betrayed by an idiot agent who heard that, there's a monster movie with Arnold. Let's have Jean-Claude fight Arnold. Let him be the monster. Now, the agent had never read the script. But we didn't know who Jean-Claude was, and he hadn't made any movies, or at least movies that we'd seen. So somehow the studio made this deal. And poor Jean-Claude comes down. And they put him in the first Monsters costume that the designer had done. And he came out wearing this thing. And there was just this blue streak of Belgian French cursing. He was so angry and justifiable because he'd been betrayed. We spent a little bit of time talking to him and finding out who he was and all this stuff. I realized that this is nonsense. You shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing movies as you. This is crazy. And he apologized like crazy. And then after we got the suit fixed, the guy who was in the suit was a 16
Kevin Peter
guy. Yes, he was 7 feet 6 inches tall, giant man. Who's in the movie playing at the very end. He's the helicopter pilot. So we can get his face in the movie. That was all. I don't know. Have I told you what happened with John Claude?
Yes.
You know, we sent him home with giant apologies. It was not his fault at all.
Now we know the story of the poor Jean-Claude. I would like to know the story of Arnold. Now, can you say us, Arnold, is he a good or a bad actor?
No, Arnold is wonderful. Arnold is a wonderful man. Arnold is an honest man. He's really cool. And he's just like you see. It's such a shame that he can't run for president of the United States. I'm not kidding. You know, Arnold is a Republican, so he would, you know, the right-wingers would be happy. And Arnold is absolutely not a fascist. So it would be wonderful. He wasn't born in the United States, so he can't be one. I thought Carl Weathers just as a way to help Arnold with that.
Because Carl was a good actor.
Carl was a wonderful actor, right? And I figured the more I could make it so that Arnold is surrounded by good actors who make the situation real, then all Arnold has to do is react. He doesn't have to carry it himself. He just reacts to what they throw at him. And that was the idea. But Arnold did better than that. Now, normally when a star is not on camera, somebody else is shooting, the star is back in his trailer, right? On the front of whoever. But not Arnold. Whenever Carl Weathers was working, Arnold was right on his side of the set watching everything he did. Because he wanted to learn. And nobody said a word about it. He never said anything. But it was perfectly clear. He knew Carl, he knew how to act. And he wanted to know more. Arnold is really cool that way. He's like a sponge for information. He's a good man.
You like him?
Yes, I like and respect him, and I always have. So I never felt that I had to tell lies in movies that Arnold was in. You know, yes, I was glorifying him, okay, but I wasn't lying. I have been in situations where I was supposed to glorify a person I thought was an asshole. Arnold wasn't, so I had no trouble.
Okay. After Arnold, we will talk about Bruce. Now we are in 1988, the year when Die Hard hit the screen and became a huge success. I think that Die Hard was supposed to be a sequel of an old Frank Sinatra movie called The Detective, is it right? At the beginning, it was the idea of, you were not in the script at this time. Okay, it was supposed to be the sequel of a Frank Sinatra movie, but the character was too old, and finally he was younger in the movie. John McTiernan is both released.
Okay. When the script came to me, it was Richard Gere was supposed to be, and the character was suave, well-dressed, and really cool. But Richard Gere didn't want to do it. And Joel went and made a deal with, I don't know, Joel's, Bruce's agent called up Joel and said, hey, what about blah, 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 blah. And Joel went to the studio said, yeah, we can do that. And Joel came to me and said, can you figure out how to make this movie with Bruce Willis?
Who was a TV star at the time, not a movie star yet.
Well, he had just done, I'll tell you about that one. Anyway, Joel asked me, can you figure out how to make this movie with Bruce Willis? And I went, yeah, okay. But I warned him it was going to take a lot of changes. But I had said going in, before I even got involved, you see, I sent the script out like 4 times, because it was a serious action movie about terrorists. And I kept saying to Joel, you know, nobody likes terrorists. You know, even if you support their cause, you don't feel good about terrorists. No one feels good. No one has fun watching terrorism. It's just a sad thing that's in the world. And you can't make movies that people go to because they want to be entertained. You can't make movies about terrorism. And so I said to Joel, can we make them robbers? Everybody likes a good robber. The better it is, the more fun quality it is, right? What is it en français?
Les voleurs. Parce que les terroristes sont voleurs.
No, the fox.
Fox.
The character is a fox.
Ah, renard. Le renard.
Renard, okay, yes. You know, a good robber makes a fool of the farmer, of the police, and we all enjoy it. So I had, I don't know, about the fourth time Joel sent me the script. I said, okay, I'll do it if we can do this, okay? And I said that the style of the movie, I said, it starts like this. There's this guy that comes to no, that happened. Forget that. Anyway, it was, the question was, how do we make it about Bruce? And so we had to change a whole bunch of stuff, you know, because Bruce was a working class, aggressively working class. And so therefore, obviously, the bad guys have to become upper class. And I got this wacko notion that the structure of the story should be a Shakespearean comedy.
In one night, like Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah, something like that. And it was a sort of secret melody that I kept in the back of my head for how to organize the story, for the style of the movie. Like, you know, Midsummer Night's Dream is, you know, all the princes come back. It happens in a festival night, first of all. A festival night. Christmas. Okay. And on that night, the world gets turned upside down. All of the social classes get turned upside down. All the princes become asses. All the asses become princes. And in the morning, this is all one night. It's just one night. And in the morning, the true lovers are reunited. Okay? It's just that simple. And that was the secret melody I used to deal with to make that story. We had specific things. Bruce had just become a movie star that year. His agent had made 3 big deals. 4, counting Die Hard, but big deals for him to be a movie star. So he had starred in 3 movies that came out in 4 hours. They all bombed. Because Bruce's style was, he was a wise ass. He was sacrilegious. He was always throwing dead cats on other people's cathedrals. So, and on a small screen, television, that worked perfectly. He was just a crazy smartass. But on a big screen, the audience could see that he was angry. And he'd be a smartass, but they could tell he was angry. And they didn't like it. This was such a serious thing that a week before the movie came out, the studio, always courageous leaders, came up with a new poster that took Bruce off the poster. I'm serious, I'm kidding. But we'd already dealt with that. Because we knew we had to make the audience, let the audience in on Bruce, on who he was, what it was about. And the essence of it is that Bruce is a very tormented man, particularly then. And his humor all came from internal torment. He was terribly angry. And because of that, these sparks would fly off that were fascinating. But we had to let the audience in on who he, the man, was. And build that into the story of Bruce is the way he is because Bruce doesn't like Bruce. Bruce is a tormented man. So that whenever he is a smartass, that's him rising above his depression. That's him being courageous. And each act of being sacrilegious and a wise act became an act of courage. Does that make sense? See what I mean? Okay. And we built that into the story, really. And consequently, the audience could get into Bruce because they could tell what it was about. That, like, the best director cast in the world is Robert Redford. Okay? He did a movie called Ordinary People, which was a mystery story of something's wrong in this family. Something's really wrong in this family. Somebody's evil. And it starts to present as you told us the young man, and then you wonder if it's the word whatever. But the secret at the end of the whole movie that you learn of, who is the sicko in this family is the mother, who was Mary Tyler Moore. And it worked perfectly with who Mary Tyler Moore was. I don't mean that she was a bad person. But what the audience had always known was she was being perky, married, sweet. They always knew that in her eyes, those were the eyes of her when normal. She was untamed. She was one tough, driven lady behind the smiles, right? And that dovetailed perfectly with the story that Redford was telling. So when the audience got to it, they were in themselves saying, aha, I knew it all along. I've always known it, okay? So they felt great. And I've always taken that as just a really important lesson. That the audience always remembers who the person is, who the actor is inside. They always know you can't lie. A little bit. But for a person that the movie's about, you can't lie. It's got to be the person has got to inside somehow be part of, be somewhat like the character of the story. Because the audience will always see through whatever acting gimmicks they do. They'll look into the eyes and they'll know. another thing that comes from that, something I always do, is at the beginning of a movie, I always try to give the audience a couple minutes just to get into the actor's eyes. When nothing's going on, but they're right there. Okay, and if you look at dialogue, in the first 5 minutes or so, just shots of Bruce, and he's not doing anything, they're not talking about life, blah, 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 blah. But it's all about they're getting used to looking right in his eyes. They get used to him, and they instinctively then from then on know they're coming to the party with this man. That this is a movie. They're gonna watch this movie over his shoulder, okay? Because you just put them that close to him, and they spend 5 minutes there. They get used to it. And it's something I've seen people fail. There was a Bob Fosse movie, really expensive movie, big deal that was made, and it flopped. And it was called Stargate. And as Bob Fosse was a really wonderful director. But the movie just went, whoosh, people hated it. And the reason was, he didn't straighten out at the beginning who the audience was coming to the party with. And in fact, in that beginning of that movie, Eric Roberts and his girlfriend come to a party at the Hefner Mansion. And they go up and they talk to Hefner, and Eric Roberts is a complete asshole. And the audience was embarrassed. The audience was trying to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Hefner. I didn't know I was coming. I'm not really with him. I don't really know him. I'm sorry. Right? So the audience felt terrible in the first 5 minutes of the movie, 10 minutes or whatever. And they just checked out. They just, oh, no. I'm not nice to Eric Roberts. He's an asshole. Now, they could have played the exact same scene. The exact same scene. If the audience thought they were coming to this situation over Hefner's shoulder, if they thought they'd come to the party with Hefner, and this wacko asshole comes in, and Hefner stands there trying to be polite, looking at this incredible asshole, and the audience would have just walked right into the story and been with it from then on. And it was just a mistake of who did they come to the party with, right? And you have to decide, you have to make it clear, you have to choose who it is. And Hefner made a wonderful, Fosse made a wonderful movie, but he made this one mistake and just threw it away. That's funny. There are a couple of movies I would love to read. Other movies that I would love to read. I'd love to read that one. Because I can fix it. It's so easy. And there was another one, there was a Robert Redford movie. A long time ago, it was called The Great Wall Pepper. And it was by George Wright, who was a fabulous director. He was really good, wonderful. But the movie, this is my theory, the movie was too big a deal, right? In the studio, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't have the time to edit the movie. The movie's too fucking long. And you could tell that it was never just he shot it all, shot it. I hit the movie. I hit the movie fucking right there. He took 10 minutes out of it and shaped the style to the style I wanted. And it's a hit movie. instead of the disaster it was. Which is, you know, I had the same experience with Last Action Hero. The studio got just too fucking overeager and too fast. And they don't, you know, but if the executives are not filmmakers, they don't understand.
One movie that you don't have to fix is Die Hard. I want to see one scene. On va regarder une scène de Die Hard et j'aimerais que vous soyez attentifs à la manière dont John utilise la caméra pour montrer ce qui est intéressant. Donc vous allez voir Bruce Willis qui va trouver la sortie d'une scène extrêmement violente avec des glaces qui explosent dans tous les sens. Et rien qu'en un mouvement de caméra, il va nous faire comprendre ce que Bruce Willis doit faire pour sortir de la scène et sortir de la pièce. The way the character observe what's around them. And I love this shot when you show what Bruce Willis, what John McTiernan is thinking, showing his eyes, the exit door, his feet, and the glass all around. I like it. Where did you get this idea to show how it works, how his brain works with one shot? It's genius. Yeah.
Paul Verhoeven.
Sorry?
Paul Verhoeven.
Oh, why? Explain it.
Also, Bernardo Bertolucci. The Ottobre.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, it's just, look, it's you know, instead of cutting stuff together, you have to know what order every sentence in a movie is. You have to know the order. Because, as I said, it's not random access, right? It is a sequence of shots in a particular order. Well, you don't have to just put them together with splices. You can, like a human being looks at this and looks at that, and then over there, and checks his wife, and then comes back to you, okay? Why shouldn't the camera do the same thing? Why put the cuts in the middle? If you know what the sequence is, and it's a simple sequence. He wants to go out the door. He looks at the floor. It's covered with glass. He looks at his foot. It's bare. Okay, we got the problem, right? We got the idea. As I said, I wasn't the first person to thought of it. I was maybe the first, American that was making mass market movies. But this scene, incidentally, there is a story that goes with this. When I was doing Predator, I kept getting these notes from the studio. I mean from some of the executives at the studio, to get more pictures of gunfire, more close-ups of the guns. Now, it turned out that the executive who was pushing this was really fetishizing the black barrel of a gun and the white smoke. It was really creepy. And it was also, the part I didn't like about it was I thought it was gun pornography. That they were selling gun pornography. And I couldn't figure out, I couldn't just say no. So what I did is I said, look, I will create a scene where you will just get 5 whole minutes of all these guns going off. Just picture the guns. Okay? But I was going to do it in a situation where I could control it. So they shoot, and the first thing that somebody comes running back in and says, we hit nothing. Which was, my notion of a moral compromise that I was not doing gun pornography because I was saying that it was guns were in it. Okay, but That's why it's in this movie. Okay? And then it was in it's in the Matrix, over and over in every Matrix, blah, blah, blah. But what it really came from was me being pissed off at notes from the studio of show more pictures of gun barrels. And the compromise I reached was, you shut up and I'll send you a whole scene of gun barrels. Okay, and that's how that scene got in there.
But there were less guns in your next movie, Red October in 1990. It's the adaptation of a big book by Tom Clancy. Why did you like this story so much? Why did you choose to direct this particular story?
I don't know. I've always loved sea stories.
And submarine stories.
My father was on a destroyer. You know, he was on the first destroyer that went into Tokyo Harbor after the surrender. He never told me that. I looked it up. My grandfather was on the Arizona 20 years before it blew up in 1918. He was an officer on that battleship, and I don't know. Part of it was that you know, because my dad was blind, we didn't have a lot of money, right? And we used to, because he had lost his sight, because he'd been in fact wounded, he was never dismissed from the Army, from the Navy rather. He was retired. So he was the world's oldest lieutenant, right? But we used to be able to go, because of that, we could go, because he was a, quote, retired Navy officer. We used to be able to go and stay on Navy bases, and that's where we would stay when we went on vacation or something, or travel. We would go. So I was always around the Navy as a little kid. And, you know, sea stories they're the best boys' adventure stories. They're sea stories. And I love that book. I went chasing it to try to option it. And I was 2 days too late. They sold it to somebody else. And then Paramount had it, and they started developing it. And they weren't interested in hiring a director, blah, 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 blah. And they developed for like 4 years or something. They kept 3 years. They kept writing script after script after script after script. And the scripts might have been interesting, but they weren't the story. It would just be, you know, the writer would pick the scenes out of the book. It was made every page look book. So he'd pick the things he liked and stick it in there. And then somebody would come along and make it cooler. So the script they had, when I began talking to them, they had Jack Ryan, who was in a rowing show at Harvard with a cigar in his mouth. I mean, talk about mixed metaphor. And I went to them and I said, guys, Tom Clancy is a sui guy. Tom Clancy taught himself to write. Okay? He has wanted to write the best sea story ever for 20 years or more. So Tom wasn't a real estate agent, was an insurance agent. And his wife's father owned the real estate agency that he worked for. So he was just, and he wanted to write to buy his way out of bondage, really. Buy his dignity, really, that was what it was about. And it took him a long time. He wrote a lot before. He wrote actually a bunch of books before, but anyway, I said to the executives, Tom is writing the best sea story he could possibly imagine from his childhood. What do you think that is? It's Treasure Island.
Robert Wilson.
Guys, it's Treasure Island. Okay? This boy, okay, fine, in this case he's 28, but he's the boy, compared to all these other guys, gets a piece of secret information, a map, a secret map, okay? Secret information. And because of that, they go off on a vast adventure out across the seas, and he meets this terrifying, the scariest pirate of all time, who turns out to have a heart of gold, Long John Silver. And he and Long John straighten everything out, and the boy goes home, grown up, Okay, that's the essence of Caccia. And I just said, look, if you go through this 800 pages of book, and you choose all the scenes to help you tell that story. And I'll bet at the end of it, you'll have a screenplay that actually represents the book, the experience of the book. And they said, oh yeah? And I said, yeah. And they said, all right, you go right ahead and do it. And we'll give you this writer to work with. So, I sat down with his name's Larry Ferguson. And we worked for not that long. We did it pretty fast, like about 5 weeks or something. Where we went through, and as I said, just said, okay, the spine of this story is Treasure Island.
This way.
Pardon me?
It would work this way.
Yeah, and we gave it to the studio and they said, why not? This is actually sort of the book we read. This is why we liked the book. And I said, oh, really?
Smart guys. So after the verticality of dialogue, you work on the horizontality of the submarines. Of course, you shoot on the sets, moving sets to replicate the submarines, but you also work with real submarines, real helicopters on sea. On va regarder une scène d'Octobre Rouge, on a quelque chose de l'Ouest en mer avec des vrais sous-marins, des vrais hélicoptères, mais on parle après de l'aide de la Navy qui a aidé John à tourner cette scène. On regarde. Values in the movie, I think there is a story of strange ponytail on the Sean Connery haircut. Can you tell us about this?
I will, just a minute. This scene. Stop it.
Stop. On peut arrêter la scène, on peut arrêter la scène là.
Cut.
On peut arrêter la scène. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Okay. This scene, I really learned about what's called microclimates. Okay. Because it was a real Navy submarine, and a real Navy helicopter, we had to make the arrangements months and months in advance. Right? And so I said, all right, where can I be certain that it will be stormy, where I could get a submarine? But why for this, right? So we made arrangements to shoot in, it's called the Sailor Sea, off Seattle, in March, the rainiest time of the year. But what I didn't know was that out in the middle of, this is called the Strait of Juan de Fuca, out in the middle of the water, it actually isn't cloudy. The storms don't go out there because the water's cold. So there may be raining for weeks on the land, but out there it's sunny every day. Right? So we have this is horrible. They go out day after day and get stung because it was sunny. It had to storm. And finally, we shot the whole thing in 20 minutes or so first flight at dawn, right? For like 4 mornings in a row. We got all of that stuff. You know, very, very first flight that day was the only way we could get it done. Okay. Sean's haircut. Well, I suggested to him, because Sean had done this whole thing, and he wanted to show, he did say this before, he wanted to show, look, I'm bald, so what? You know, a lot of men are bald, tough, deal with it. And it was like, and I said to him, okay, you've made that point. Now, since we're in show business, and makeup and even wigs are part of the tools we use, would you consider some sort of hair? And he thought about it. And he said, Samuel Beckett. Okay, now Samuel Beckett was a French, well, he's actually Irish, but he wrote mostly in French, existentialist playwright, really way out weird stuff. But he had crazy hair. And Sean said, okay, I'm going to get a wig made like that. And he did, but he designed it. It was his idea.
And yet, he had a ponytail in the next movie with you, Medicine Man. He had his famous ponytail. It was strange to see with long hair like this. Time flies by. I think that we have 10 minutes more before letting the audience ask some questions. I wanted to talk about the last section.
We'll go as long as we
can.
can.
You can continue? Oh, okay.
I don't know. They may be another way, but
I would like to see.
I got nowhere else to go.
No, but just after, so we will turn the lights down and put us outside. I wanted to see one scene of Last Action Hero. It's one of my favorite of all your movies. It's a scene where you manage to make Arnold plays Shakespeare. Si on pourrait regarder la scène, Arnold regarde Hamlet, c'est comme ça, pour nous faire tous plaisir. And we're ready to do one scene, theater, Shakespeare, and Arnold. I don't know how to summarize just the scene. It's one of my favorite scenes. Was it easy to make him play this part, Hamlet?
Oh, of course. Arnold has a great sense of humor, a wonderful sense of humor. And looking at it, you know, that's one of the few parts of the movie that have the proper pace. Okay, the studio committed to making the movie 7 months before they wanted it in the theaters, and they insisted that they had to go the week after Jurassic Park, which is incredibly stupid. But 7 months then was like lightning to complete a movie. And most of the movies, we've never edited it. Really, it's like, you know, because I shoot kind of shot for shot. I don't cover things. I shoot the shot I want at this particular point. And there aren't a lot of options, really, so it doesn't take long to edit. But you have to cut it down and build the pace. And a lot of this movie, you know, cut the heads and tails off the shots, and that's what's in the damn movie. It went from, you know, at the time, Guild, the Directors Guild minimum said that you were supposed to have 10 weeks to edit a movie. We did this one 4 weeks from starting to edit until it was in the damn theater. It was really fast. And this is, the rest of the movie is this sort of pace. Okay, so this is like one of those movies I told you about that I'd like to go edit because I can fix it. This just happens to be was one that I did. I'd love to go edit that and fix it. Anyway, Arnold's a great sense of humor. He's very funny. And loves doing it. The other thing that Arnold loved, that I learned by the first day I worked with him, was because he was at first, he was still at the beginning, he was scared about acting. I mean, he never let him know who he was. And so I used to try to get him in the middle of something and read. And the first day shooting I did with him, I had this, there was this long hillside. It was really muddy and filled with rocks. And it was a hard thing to get up. And I shot this scene where he's trying to get that girl up the hill. I don't know if it was the third guy or another guy or not, I can't remember. But the first half of the day, him shooting with me, he got to, just be in the mud, trying to climb this super hard thing, right, and drag this girl along. And he was sweating, he was muddy, and he didn't have to act. He just had to do it, and he loved it. He loved any day when we had something physical to do. Because it was simple, it was fun. I think he enjoyed working with me because I would try to create those situations as much as possible. To create a real situation, never mind what the script says, create a real situation that he can be in the middle of. And it made it fun for him. And because it was fun for him, it's good. It's good. That sense of fun was in him because he always had that. He's always got that twinkle in his eye.
I would like to watch another scene of another movie where I think you will expect, but it could be difficult to shoot. It's in Die Hard with Vengeance, your next movie. On va regarder une scène qui se passe dans la rue de New York. You are shooting in the street. There was nothing written on the board. Or really, it was written.
You're right, actually. We had it on the board, and I got to the situation. I said, no. No. We will upset people. It will get in the newspapers the wrong way. So I had it painted out, and we put it back in the computer there.
The other scenes of the movie, the stunt scene, explosions, were shot in New York. The first scene, there is a big explosion in a store. How was it to shoot in the streets of New York? You have to close all the streets or to block all the streets of the city?
It wasn't hard. The city at the time was trying to encourage films. And because I'd gone to school there, I'd always wanted to make a movie that felt like it really was in New York. Like you were really in New York. And I think this one does have that feeling. This is really New York. And it was also sort of a stunt. Because people had said, wow, we made the first hour and it's all in one building. Wow. And so I wanted to just say, okay, I can do the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's in one building. I can make the entire city of New York. A cage that's too small. And also this one, it's a buddy movie, rather than just a repeat of the original movie. That was why I said, yes, I would do this, because it wasn't remaking the same movie, it was a different movie. And that was the idea. Commercial people are always into if you get one movie that works, you have to remake it, remake it, remake it, remake it. I just never thought that was a dignified way to be a filmmaker. It seemed to me that, if the studio wants to remake the movie, they can get somebody else to do it. serious about being a filmmaker, you know, you should figure out how to make your next movie, which, you know, in theory should be different than your next movie. I never got the chance really. There were all sorts of different movies I wanted to make. Actually, there still are. I have a historical drama that I want to make. It's a cowboy movie. I have another story I want to make. And I have a science fiction movie.
Still have time to make all those new stories and all those movies?
I have just enough time.
And I just have time to show you one last thing because already the time is short. We talked about all the main themes of your career. There is one last thing that I want to talk with you about is your love for foreign languages. And there is one scene in the 13th Warrior when the character of Arab, played by Antonio Banderas, will learn the Norseman languages. On va regarder la scène du 13e foreign languages without subtitles, because you don't like subtitles either. Why is it so important for you to show those kinds of stories?
It's not so important, they're just, it's a thing that happens all the time, you know, people are together and don't speak the same language. And you know, the old Hollywood style of, well, you know, the Germans all speak English, doesn't work. You have to, it seems to me that you have to deal with it. So in Red October, I took the thing with the gimmick that was in Judgment in Nuremberg. Maximilian Schell was the prosecutor speaking in German. There is a simultaneous English translator of their son. But at some point, in the middle of the German sentence, the camera zooms into his mouth, and it then zooms back out, and he continues in English. And it's just, you know, the audience gets it, okay? We're not going to have to read the entire movie. He's still speaking German, but you can understand it. So I just did the same thing in Red October. And here, I wasn't going to do the same thing, because it's a different situation. You have the stranger who has to learn. And also, so it's also an opportunity to say he's smart. And he's like cool. And one of the things I liked about this story was, and this sort of, you know, because my father's family were all, I told you they were lawyers, but they were also politicians, Democratic politicians, and they kind of, it was Roosevelt ideology, and the whole idea is that people of different cultures are simply people of different cultures, okay? And it isn't one isn't superior to the other, and, you know, and he built an entire alliance with the people who the rich Anglos just, you know, didn't care for. The Italians and the Irish and the Polish and the Ukrainians and all of that. And one of the things I liked about this story was, I'm going to do an action movie where the hero is Mohammed. He's Muslim. And it's not hidden. He even, says his prayers on screen. Okay? And it's a little stupid thing that I was proud of. Okay? It's like I'm personally proud of the fact that I made James Earl Jones an animal when there were no black animals. Because, imagination has to proceed to come first before the reality. If no one can imagine a black admiral giving orders to a smart, intelligent, young white man, and the white man goes, "Yes, sir," then you can't have it until you can imagine it, right? And so I was happy that I did that. And you know, I'm happy here that I took a Muslim and made him an action hero for all sorts of regular Anglo-European and American folks. And the hidden message in that is, okay, this is cultural difference. Okay, it's, you know, he's not inferior to us just because he goes to the church. Small things, it doesn't make me stand the Kramer, but sort of the way I dealt with all of that stuff was kind of like a Hippocratic oath, for filmmakers. At a minimum, do no harm. Okay. You can't fix things, or you can't be Stanley Kramer and really try to go straight at fixing social problems. At least don't make them worse. And that is a part of the responsibility of a mass market director. You know, if you do private art movies or something, then you don't have to worry about that. But if this is a thing that, you know, these big corporations investing $100 million, and then they're going to spread it all over the world, all these people are going to see it. You have to be aware of what is the meaning of what you're doing. What is the social effect or cost of what you're doing? So I got really shy about guns and movies. So, like all through Last Action Hero, they were trying to get the little boy to take out guns and shoot and this and that. And I said that's the last thing in the world we can do. You can't, in the story, say that the answer to this kid's problem is he grabs a gun. Finally, I had to do something, and it's like, okay, we'll shoot up the jungle if I can have somebody say they did nothing. Finally, I said, okay, you can have a gun, but he's only going to point it at him. Nobody else is going to point at a human being. As I said, there is still a small moral problem. If you work for a large corporation making mass market stuff, you are morally compromised from the beginning. I'm serious. You have to make separate pieces. Make a separate piece in each circumstance. It's funny, I did some commercials in France a couple of years ago, and they wanted me to shoot this stuff with torturing somebody. And the agency types, right? And I finally went to the head of the agency and said, look, I've shot an awful lot of action stuff. I've done, you name it, I've shot it. But I never shot anything like this that I would go through my camera. I never shot any extended pictures of somebody beating the hell out of somebody else, or someone torturing someone else. And the head of the agency said, did it, I haven't done any more French commercials.
You said you were so happy to make those scenes, and I'm so happy that you made those movies, and then that you brought so much intelligence to those kind of action movies. So thank you very much, John McTiernan. Dans votre time, je voudrais prendre quelques minutes peut-être pour qu'on puisse prendre peut-être